us today for roundtable discussion. Today we are happy to have two folks with us today for employee recruitment and retention. So we have Jason Stroud, who is the Assistant City Administrator for the City of River Falls. And we have Sharon Eveland, who is the Administrator for the Village of Shorewood Hills. So they're going to go through their presentation, and there will be time for questions when they are done. So in the interest of time, we would ask that you would hold your questions until they've completed the presentation. So with that, I think we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. Jason and Sharon, welcome, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for having us. Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm Jason, and as Bob said, I'm the Assistant City Administrator with River Falls over here on the western portion of the state. We're about 35 minutes from Minneapolis, and as we get into the slide presentation, I'll give you a little bit more about that as well. But I'm appreciative of the opportunity to be asked to be here. And I guess, Sharon, if you'd like to say hello, and while you're doing that, I'll start sharing the screen.
Sure. Hello, everybody. I am Sharon Eveland, and as Bob said, I'm the Village Administrator in Shorewood Hills. I've been in that position for a little over a year, and prior to that, I served in another community in Northeast Wisconsin, which, as Jason also said, same thing. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but I do appreciate the opportunity to present to you guys today, and hopefully you'll be able to get at least a few little nuggets out of this. And all right, so Jason, back to you.
Yeah, and you'll see we're gonna kind of bounce tag team back and forth, and I think I would enjoy. I personally enjoy presenting more in person because then I can use my hands and I can move around. So it's sometimes challenging to stay constrained in front of the screen here. But I guess before I get started, just to make sure you are seeing the right screen, you are seeing the slide, correct? Not the speaker notes. Just making sure. I've done that before, and it's like gets a little confusing. Yeah, so this, I guess, a little bit of background. I think Sharon and I somehow got connected on LinkedIn a couple years ago now, not knowing each other at that time yet in the Wisconsin circles necessarily. But after seeing each other share some similar thoughts and articles and trends related to kind of new efforts on trying to be an employer of choice in what was kind of during the COVID years or now post-COVID years, when we're dealing with an aging workforce and tighter labor pool, and this perfect storm coming together of necessitating our need to be more competitive for talent. I'm not super familiar with the Madison area or Dane County area. But I certainly know here in our area, and I venture to guess perhaps it's the same, that we're competing with a lot of other entities, especially with us being a bedroom community for the Twin Cities metro area. Our workforce has options and the ability to kind of pick and choose where they go to work. And I think what we learned coming out of COVID is that if we want to recruit and, more importantly, perhaps retain the best talent we can, we needed to step up our game to be continually try to be an employer of choice. And certainly some of the things I'll talk about on behalf of River Falls, we're not perfect at. We're still feeling our way through and learning as we go. But I feel like we have done some things right, and we've made a lot of great strides. And so it's enjoyable to maybe perhaps share some different things we're doing, and I know Sharon feels the same way, and hopefully we can also learn from you all, or if not today, at other ventures as well, as we all kind of go together in Wisconsin to figure this out, because it is something we all need to kind of be paying attention to, and perhaps working hard to make sure we're doing what we can in order to recruit and retain the best talent. The Wisconsin Policy Forum had some interesting data in the Wisconsin State Journal that essentially boils down to that we have this aging workforce and a tight labor market, and so there's fewer employees and more jobs available at a time, perhaps, and I'm venturing to guess you all are encountering some of the same changes in community expectations at a time when community members are perhaps expecting more of us, and or there's more to do as a result of greater infrastructure spending and projects in front of us and on the horizon. So it's kind of, for us, it created this perfect storm of trying to improve our game to continually be the employer of choice so we can keep the best or bring in the best.
And so I think one of the things that we also want to stress too is that it's not about doing everything. It's not about implementing everything all at once, or even really implementing everything that we're going to talk about today. It's really about understanding that we are in a sea change moment in terms of employee desires and the flexibility that employees are expecting now. And I think that if we as municipalities and local governments, if we don't kind of acknowledge that fact and accept that fact and learn how to integrate that into how we operate and how we do things, one way or the other, you're going to get pulled across that line, even if it's kicking and screaming. So I think it's better to acknowledge it and to figure out how to make it work. And, you know, we all struggle with change at times. And so the natural inclination when you hear something new is, oh, well, that's not going to work. Like that's the kind of the first thing a lot of us think. But it's for now, we're in that position where we need to be asking, how can we make this work? How can we get to yes? And what used to mean being an employer of choice is it's not the same thing anymore. And that is shifting. So, you know, what we need to be doing is asking, why not? When somebody comes to you and says, hey, we have this idea on a way that we could provide some more flexibility. We need to start digging deep and saying, okay, well, let's talk about this. Let's see how we can make this work. Because again, I mean, if we don't, we are going to forever struggle to attract and retain employees. So next slide, Jason. So I think one of the other things that, you know, the reason why Jason and I work well on this together, in my opinion anyways, is that I look at what Jason and River Falls are doing and have done, and I look at them, in my head, I see them as, this is what we want to strive to be. As Jason has acknowledged, I mean, they're still working through things, and I think that's always going to be something we have to be working on and not just kind of setting back and let happen. But I remember when we were prepping for this and looking at everything that River Falls was doing, I was like, wow, like my stuff seems so insignificant, you know, compared to what they're doing. But then came the realization that we've started, you know, everybody starts somewhere, and you can start with something very, very simple, and then you can build up to that. And so when you look at Clintonville, which is where I was at, again, Northeast Wisconsin, I was there for almost 5 years, 4.5 years, and population 4,500. Shorewood Hills, as everyone knows, is right next door to Madison. Population of 2,400. There are a lot of similarities in terms of, you know, the services provided, perhaps some differences in the extent. I think one of the biggest differences is that you would see is that in Shorewood Hills, as everyone knows, there's a lot of professors, lawyers, doctors, and then Shorewood Hills is very much has a very, very strong manufacturing presence. So a lot of similarities, but also a lot of differences. And next slide, Jason. So I think the biggest thing is, again, is that everyone starts somewhere. And Jason, if you want, yeah, in person, it works better to kind of go through these like individually, but the important part is that everybody starts somewhere. And what are on here are some questions to ask yourself. about some really minor things that you could do to start considering what kind of culture that you want to have and what kind of environment you want to provide for your employees. For example, do your salaried staff really need to complete timesheets? Now, I understand some of the reasons why someone would, potentially want somebody to complete a timesheet that's salaried from a if wage claim issues in the future. I think some of the decisions that we have to start making is what kind of trust are we going to provide. Salaried staff, whether they're working 5 hours or working 50 hours, are going to get paid the same thing. And so one of the things that I did in Clintonville and that I do in where I'm at now is my salaried staff do not complete timesheets. My thought process and my belief is that if the work is getting done, if things aren't constantly falling through the cracks and I don't have employees come to me going, so-and-so is never here, that's really all I'm worried about. At the end of the day, they're adults, and I have faith and I have trust in my staff. And if I can't trust them to get the work done without having to punch a clock, then I think it's a very different conversation that you need to be having with staff. Do you pay staff for emergency closures? There are a lot of communities that say, hey, we have to shut down because, there's 4 feet of snow on the ground. Or in the case in Clintonville, a year after I started, we had 32 inches in like 24 hours. And as somebody who is from the South, that was a big eye opener. And I found at the time that our policy was if we made the decision to shut down staff or shut down operations before staff came into work, we didn't pay them for the day. They had to use their personal time. And that did not sit well with me. We are essentially telling staff, we want you to stay home because it is not safe to come into work, and yet we're not going to pay you. And I know that it also frustrated some of the staff too, to be told they couldn't come into work. So we worked and we revised that policy in Clintonville. And we have the same policy here in Shorewood Hills now. Another thing is, do you provide flexibility in the use of sick leave? Everyone's personnel manual probably specifies you can use sick leave to care for yourself or immediate family and things of that nature. But how many really support, and whether it's in your policy manual or not, to say, if you need a mental health day, fine, take it. And to really support that and encourage that. And I realize some communities have PTO, which completely changes how you look at things. But for communities that do still separate sick and vacation leave, I think understanding and being a little bit more flexible in how that time off is utilized would go a long way with staff. And that plays into how you define family. Everyone's family is different. And so I'm not saying one way or one definition is better than others. But these are questions that you should be asking yourself. And the lastly is, do you understand that employees have lives outside of the work they do for the community, and do your community members? And I think that is probably one of the most important questions that you need to be asking yourself, and that your community needs to be asking yourselves, because we should be supporting our staff as whole human beings and understanding and respecting that there is so much more to them than the service they provide when they come in for their 8 or 10 or hours or however many hours it happens to be that day. And if as an employer that you provide that support and not just provide that support, but communicate that support to the community, it is going to make employees feel valued. It's going to make them feel heard. And you're going to be able to provide it's part of what's going to be able to allow you to provide an environment for employees to thrive and to want to come to work every day. And at the end of the day, it's about, the culture, the environment that you want to provide for your employees. And that may be very different for different communities. And that's okay, but it's about asking the questions. And then I think what I want, this next part is to give you guys an example of something where even when you're small, that it doesn't mean you can't still think big. In 2019, as part of a complete overhaul to the City of Clintonville's personnel manual, we implemented a paid parental leave. And again, for those of you who have some experience in the state, I want you to think about this in the frame of Northeast Wisconsin. This was huge for the area and for our community. And to the best of my knowledge, I was able to determine at the time you were putting this in place, that Clintonville became only the third municipality in the entire state of Wisconsin that offered paid parental leave. And that was after the city of Madison, the city of Sun Prairie. And, you know, I include this link from Jerry because there was a news agency that picked up the story and contacted the league for comments. And it says that Wisconsin has been considered for a long time a very friendly state. It's got great schools. We've got generally very safe cities and villages to live in. But this is a reminder that you can never sit on your reputation and think it's going to last forever. Clintonville's trying something new. I think you're going to see other cities trying something new. And I think that's really a really good summary for what Jason and I are trying to say is that we can't sit on what we've always been doing because it's not going to work anymore. And I think that's if you can take that quote, that sort of thought process and bring that into what you're doing in your own community, I think is going to serve your community very well. And just from a professional standpoint, I think getting that paid parental leave will probably be one of the top highlights of my entire career, no matter what happens moving forward. Because for me, that is a huge deal. Jason?
Yeah, and I would just add real quick before I transition to some River Falls stuff. So kudos to the Dane County area. You see there, Madison and Sun Prairie, I guess we're the first two. We recently in River Falls, we recently did our own form of paid paternal leave. We call it a Be Well program. And I contacted Sharon and to get a copy of what she had done previously, and Caitlin Steen in Sun Prairie to get a copy of Sun Prairie's, and modeled ours then after that. So that, you know, we kind of share this information back and forth. But I will tell you, when I was making the business case to our city administrator and mayor to approve it, quickly found that most of the large employers in our area, private employers, are offering it already, often 6 weeks, if not more, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. Almost every public employer right across the river for us in Minnesota, the counties and the cities are all offering it already. And so, you know, we knew if we wanted to be competitive for talent. And so what we're talking about here, you know, FMLA, Wisconsin FMLA requires us to give people time off for certain reasons, which include becoming a new parent, but it doesn't require we pay them. And so it's, you know, you may have programs where people can use their own leave banks or use whatever accruals they have. This is a conscious decision to then pay them to set aside a pot of leave for us to pay people for those qualifying reasons, which we've loosened. I'll talk a little bit more real quick, but I just wanted to say kudos to the Dane County area for being two of the, you know, Madison and Sun Prairie being two of the first in the state, and just share with you all that, you know, we now have this in place because of two of your own, Sharon and Caitlin, sharing that information. So it's great to have these networks.
And I also want to, Jason,
real
quick, I also want to add to, in regards to that I think this is a prime example of communities being brave enough to be one of the first and then seeing that cascade effect, because it brings me such joy every time I see another community putting this in place. And in fact, Bill Chang from DeForest is on this, and I want to, I know that they had just recently put a policy in place, and this is what you're going to see. I mean, some people are really scared. Well, other people aren't doing it. Okay. You know, let's keep going. And I do also want to acknowledge on the paid leave thing that the absolute support that I had from the council in Clintonville on this. I was honestly really surprised. And they were behind it immediately. And surprisingly, we didn't have the first complaint about it from the community either when it was made public. So, but yeah, I mean, you're seeing more and more communities do this, and we acknowledge and we know that we're competing with private sector employers, and this is something that is definitely a presence in the private sector. So sometimes it's about knowing that it's what's best for your community, and for the elected officials, being able to communicate that to your community.
So a little bit about River Falls, if you're not familiar. As I said, we're about half an hour from, well, I'm about 25 minutes from St. Paul and about 35, 40 minutes from Minneapolis. We are a bedroom. I call us a bedroom community. We do see a lot of our local workforce leave River Falls to go to the Twin Cities to go to work and then come home. We're about an hour west of Eau Claire. Population 16,000. We are a full utility. So, and I will tell you right now, and as my city administrator, Scott Simpson, would tell you, that being that full utility, including the electric utility, does offer us some resources to be able to do some of these things that I'm aware not everybody does. The electric revenue and our ability to allocate expenses, business expenses appropriately, from the organization to the utility, does afford us some resources to be able to employ some of these efforts. And we do have a UW campus here in the community, UW River Falls. If hopefully you're familiar with us, but if not, UW River Falls has a great ag program, some great farming related programs, and is getting, just last year got awarded a bunch of state money for a new sci-tech building that we're really excited about. And I think I was just told the governor's going to be here at 3 p.m. doing some announcements from UW River Falls today. So for us, it's all about culture, and it's nothing I created. I've had the benefit to inherit some great culture that's been established by our council, our mayor, by our city administrator, and the assistant city administrator before me. I should add, in my role as assistant city administrator in River Falls, the way we essentially work it, I'd like to say I'm the chief operating officer, or chief operations officer. So I oversee public works, utilities, the fire chief, human resources, our management analysts, and probably some other things. But I always tell people it's best for me to just say I do whatever my administrator doesn't want to do. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. He keeps the stuff he wants to do, and I get past the stuff he doesn't want to do. So for us, it really always comes down to culture, and that's how we kind of lead from day one of an employee's new experience with us. Is we're continually always referring to our values. We make values-based decisions. I came from a public safety background where everything was had a lot of policies, and there was a policy for everything. You would find our employee handbook has very few policies, which was frustrating to me coming into this organization, but I've grown to love it because we have some freedom to make some decisions so long as they're based on our values. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, the culture is what's driving how people act, and that really does eat your strategy for breakfast. So what I'm going to talk about is not any one such policy, so much as it is this idea that we want people to have a good experience and live your way and work your day. Is kind of what we've dubbed. So it's a culmination of different efforts that we're just trying to be the local government employer of choice for our area. I'm going to tell you right now, some of these things have caused some bumps in the road. Some are working great, some aren't perfect. We'll continually adjust. But there's one thing I'm extremely proud of that I feel is a result of our efforts, and is that in the last 5 years and that's how long I've been here, we have not lost any employee to another public employer unless it was for promotional opportunity, which we've supported them leaving then, or for them to relocate back close to home. We haven't lost anybody that's kind of jumped from one city to another. And we've recruited several from cities in the Twin Cities area. And I've got 2 finance staff that left working for the city of Eau Claire and commute over an hour each way on the days that they have to come in, which is only about twice a week, to come work for us because of this culture. So it's something I'm very proud of. So some examples of some of the efforts we're doing to try to kind of find a new way to be the employer of choice. Dress for your day. I never would have thought this would have got me the return on investment that it did. I was blown away by how happy this made people. But I had a conversation with our city administrator one day. We had the old policy where people could wear jeans on a Friday. And I asked him one day, I was like, what do we care if Bridget in finance wear jeans? She sits in a cubicle all day and doesn't meet with anybody. He's like, I don't care. Nobody's ever asked me. So we did this dress for your day guidelines where this obviously doesn't apply to our uniformed personnel, but we've really just loosened up. We trust people to be adults and dress appropriately for whatever they have planned for the day. And this, and I'll talk a little bit about our PTO, this has routinely been cited as like one of people's number one most favorite benefits, which just kind of blew me away. We do, we allow people to work with their supervisor to kind of set their schedules as appropriate. It doesn't work for every work unit, but again, we empower supervisors to do what they can to try to meet that flexibility. And our work from home expectations, we do not have a work from home policy. We have taken it to our city's executive team a number of times of whether we want to have one or not. And we've consistently decided not to have a formal policy. And instead, we issue the general guidance of, we generally expect staff to be at the work site more often than they're not. And that was infuriating for me to begin with, because I'm a very policy-laden background. But again, that has given us some bumps in the road, but by and large, it's worked. And we know coming out of COVID, we would have lost people if we didn't increase our ability to offer flexible work from anywhere type arrangements. I tell public works staff, if you need to swing by your kid's school to catch them singing in their 1 hour holiday concert, or if you need to drop the lunchbox off, whatever it may be, okay, take the truck and go do it. Again, it's just doing what we can to accommodate the total employee and all their needs. We do, Sharon mentioned this real briefly about some communities have PTO. We made the transition to a paid time off program. I want to say 2018. We've transitioned away from annual leave and sick leave, and now have PTO, paid time off. We give every employee 6 weeks a year. Doesn't matter how long you've been here, day one or your 30th year, every employee gets 6 weeks a year. And that is your sick leave and annual leave, essentially. You use it as you deem necessary. It's use it or lose it. We don't allow you to accrue it and carry it over year to year. We do allow you to take 80 hours of it at year end and put it in your own Be Well account, which used to be an extended sick leave bank. Now it's their Be Well account. So which is part of that paid parental leave program. And that's probably the number one, I would tell you right now that often talking with people, it's that PTO program is the number one reason they're still here, a lot of them. Plus we do what we can to compensate them appropriately, but people love the PTO program.
And I'll add,
yep, go ahead.
Quick interruption on that. I think one of the important things to understand too, with River Falls and kind of how they do this stuff and have a lot more informal policies as opposed to, written down policies, is that this speaks to the culture there, because we both understand that without the right culture, without the right level of trust, without the right, environment, the informal approach may not necessarily work. So we're not saying to just jump in and just start doing everything. I mean, it has to be a very thoughtful approach and very intentional. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that whatever you do, it has to be intentional. It has to be part of a very structured plan. Is what is it you're trying to achieve? Who is it that you're trying to be?
And we're continually measuring and making adjustments as necessary and holding accountable when necessary, because you're right, it's part of that culture we instill and expect. And we've certainly, when I say I'm proud that we've retained everybody, and not lost them to other cities, I'm talking about the ones we've wanted to retain. We've certainly helped some others transition out of the organization, which is probably, which I've learned is a little bit easier for us to do because of our governance structure than perhaps some other communities. I threw in a couple pictures, just for fun. We do, but it doesn't have to be anything grandiose. We just find opportunities to just try to celebrate the employees and make it a place they want to be. So, we have these drink coolers in our conference rooms that were started as we do our own economic development efforts here. So, it's kind of, you bring a developer in and you offer them a soft drink or a water. And so we started talking, we're like, well, why don't we just tell staff if they want a water or a soft drink? Or I tell the public works director, I'm gonna buy a couple flats of pop, put them in the refrigerator at the shop. And trust me, the stuff does not get gone through like that you may think it maybe would. But it's just a little perk that we want to make it an enjoyable experience to be here. We do, it's maybe twice a year, we do bring your dog to the work day. People seem to really love that. Back before I had, I guess, as Sharon likes to say, I like to keep my chin warm. Before I had that, I loved playing with Pearl. One of the ladies at work brings her dog. It just it makes it a fun place to be. Or there's a picture there of somebody working with their laptop at a table. We typically, I think now for those that have workstations, only get laptops, and we do the docking stations. But part of the reasons for that is a conscious decision of people being able to pick it up and go and work flexible locations or wherever they're comfortable. We made investments in people that work from home, allowing them to get extra monitors for their setup. And then the top right corner, I'll just standing desks, motorized desks. We have these at the Public Works workstations here in City Hall, and it is an investment. But again, it's probably pennies on the dollar when you look at the cost of recruiting and retaining somebody. So what else? I think we really strive to be a place that people want to stay. And so we do what we can to, if people aren't necessarily happy in their current position, we try to work with them to find out is there somewhere else in the city form. So we support and allow job shadowing across different divisional boundaries or departmental lines. Ultimately, and as we do a quarterly check-in process with staff, we ask them what are their goals, where do they see themselves, how can the city help get them there. We've loosened up our tuition reimbursement benefit. It used to be very kind of controlled of it had to be directly related to their job and this and that. We don't anymore. We want people to be educated, and we want people to be excited about their future, because at the end of the day, they're going to provide better service for us because of it. And then we give them some say in the organization. So we have employee-led diversity, equity, inclusion team, green team leading our sustainability efforts, our FUN, which stands for Family, Unity, Networking, and Healthy Foundations Committee, Safety, etc. And then we just try to schedule lots of fun events. We typically do, so the FUN committee typically does monthly events that don't have to be anything grandiose. During the summer, we'll have an ice cream truck come park outside City Hall. And yeah, I mean, we spend $500 on ice cream for 125 people. But again, the return on the investment we feel is extremely worth it. And we can't do any of it if we don't have the supervisors on board, because it's those frontline supervisors and department heads that are the ones establishing the culture and reinforcing the culture. So we put all of them through baseline training. I do a training with all of them related to the things I'm talking to you about, kind of just instill this philosophy continually. And we obtain and we care about the feedback they give us, and we allow ourselves, the city administrator and I, we allow ourselves to admit when we're wrong based on that feedback, and we grow together. We're an organization with very few egos. I mentioned, so that says monthly employee one-on-ones. Some departments do quarterly just because of the volume of employees they have. Effective today, actually the meeting I was in before I joined this one, effective today, we're no longer doing annual performance reviews. That does not include our police department, because they're our only union entity, negotiated entity. But other than them, we are no longer doing annual performance reviews. We got little value out of them. And we see more value in doing monthly, perhaps quarterly, informal check-ins and stay interviews, as we're referring to them as. And you can read, I guess I just wanted to make sure nothing else I wanted to make sure I hit there. I'll talk a little bit about the executive team on another slide. That's really helped us be able to get some mileage out of our efforts. And then it's important to get out of the office and get out in the field and see what's going on. For us being, a workforce of 125, it's important for Scott and or I to get out and kind of feel the pulse. So a couple of things we do with that, we do what we call out of office efforts. So we'll just go work in a unit for a day. One of my most favorite days, I tell people this all the time, I went and worked as a mechanic at Public Works Fleet for the day, and they had me doing tune-ups on weed whips and leaf blowers, and there was music playing in the background. I could just kind of be relaxed. I wore, got all greasy, and it was one of the most favorite days I've had in a couple of years. It was just relaxing. I totally lost something I was going to say with that, but also just efforts every once in a while. So a good example, last night we had city council. We had a lot of big items go through on consent agenda, which nobody pulled off to talk about, which I can never figure out. Sometimes there's no rhyme or reason. Sometimes they pull off the little things. Sometimes they pull off the big. We had some big things go through and nobody pulled off. I was like, wow. So often what we'll do on something like that, we'll come in the next morning, we'll take a P card, and if community development had a lot of development agreements go on the agenda and get approved, we'll just come in the morning ad hoc and be like, hey, I'm taking everybody over to the coffee shop just to give you thanks for doing such a great job. It went through on consent because of the homework and background work you guys did. So it's just little efforts like that. It doesn't have to be anything grandiose. So some ways we're able to do this. Scott, our city administrator, would tell you that probably the number one way is he's been able to build a relationship with city council and earn trust credits, as he refers to them as, over his 12 years with the city. He's quick to say, like a city administrator in their first year or two with an organization probably wouldn't be successful in doing a lot of these things, that it comes with building a relationship and establishing credibility and trust. It also does help for us to be able to try new things, and there's a certain efficiency that our governance system allows us, in that our administrator is the ultimate HR authority. So we do not have finance committees, we don't have HR committees or admin committees, and I do understand how that's not the norm for a lot of the state, and probably particularly in your area. But just for us, it works. So whatever fits and works best for your organization. But so for us, our administrator has the ultimate authority. Council has given that to him over the years. But in return, he keeps the council fully informed, keeps the mayor extremely informed, seeks consensus, and continually builds that trust, etc. Our administrator does meet with council members monthly. He also empowers me. I send them regular updates directly. Whenever, if we're doing an HR initiative, or when I just hired a new public works manager, I send them stuff directly to inform them. And to date, it has worked pretty well for us. Neither Scott nor myself are naive. Council can change, and we serve at the pleasure of council. The elected leaders set the policy. That's the career we chose to work in, so we understand that, and so we know that can change. But for right now, that's where we're at, and it seems to have been able to work. And I told you how we check our egos at the door, and we empower staff to ask why and why not, and question our efforts. Some other things that help, it'd be misleading to say otherwise. The fact that we're unrestrained in terms of collective bargaining does help us allow us to have a little bit more flexibility, and perhaps spurs our ability to be more creative and innovative with some of our work units. For us, our police department is our only collective bargaining unit. However, to date, we have a very good relationship with them as well, and we extend all the same things we're doing for everybody else to our police department, with the exception of our fairly new Be Well program, which is our version of a parental and caretaker leave plus. And the only reason that's not extended is we expect that it will be when that contract comes up for renegotiation, but we're not opening it up in the midterm, if you will. We feel like we're the Goldilocks organization, probably just big enough to be able to try something where it's worth trying some of this stuff, but small enough too, where we can kind of keep it under control and still have that individualized attention on efforts, and monitor whether something's working or not, or whether there needs to be somebody held accountable. So we call it the Goldilocks size organization. And then I mentioned earlier, I talked real quick about our executive team. We've done this team one philosophy. So our executive team is the city administrator and his direct reports, and then plus a couple others. So it's our community development director, our police chief, the assistant to the city administrator, myself, And we do have our utilities director and our communications coordinator, and I'm probably missing somebody else. But it's essentially the senior leadership of the city organization, the advisory council to the city administrator. And what we found is we were trying to really instill a good culture, and oftentimes we would talk about things, and we'd have executive team members lead that meeting and go back to their departments and say, hey guys, it wasn't me, but they decided this, or be more worried about their departmental impact instead of the big picture of the organization. And so we brought in a consultant. We were actually having some issues on our executive team because of those sorts of perspectives. So we essentially got rid of some people on our executive team. We brought in a consultant and spent some retreat time of developing a shared kind of agreement on how we're going to operate. And it's this team one philosophy that the needs of the greater good come before any individualized needs, or the needs of the greater organization come before any departmental needs. And the executive team is our sounding board where we debate these ideas. We sometimes heatedly debate or argue them. But at the end of the day, when the door opens up and then we come out, we've committed to a shared consensus in making it work. And so far it seems to be working relatively well. So I would share with you some things as I talk about, albeit I know quickly, but as I talk about some of these things, you might be skeptical or say, yeah, but, and there is some yeah, but to it. We've owned right up front that there is a certain inequality, right? My public works staff don't get the opportunity to work from home the same as the finance staff. And we've just owned that up front and said, yes, period. However, we find opportunities to then offer public works some flexibility. You know, for example, hey, if you need to go to your kid's concert, take the pickup truck over and go. So it generally works. We've had to make sure that there's office coverage. Not everybody can work from home the same day, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some complexity there, and it's not comfortable for everybody. Some people don't work well without those strict boundaries or without that policy. And some supervisors we've really had to work and train some supervisors to lead with a culture focus. And certainly we are a trusting organization. By giving the people a lot of flexibility and freedom, we are trusting quite a bit. We've been burned on it a couple of times. And so we end up holding those staff accountable and correct that behavior or help them transition out of the organization. And then obviously, and so one of the bigger things we've learned since we've really had this focus effort of how can we get to yes more often, how can we say yes when feasible, but no when necessary, is the supervisor variation, different supervisors handling that differently or some being more readily embracing of this philosophy than others. So that is where our executive team has really come into play and help us standardize throughout the organization. And then I just want to mention real quick about FLSA. You know, we continue to be challenged with this HR compliance type world, archaic world that a lot of us were taught we should adhere to, in that we're perhaps light years ahead of the federal government with a lot of the ways we're doing this stuff. So the idea of letting people work from home, FLSA wasn't set up for that. And so, you know, letting them set their own work hours and work on a project in the evening versus the morning, et cetera, et cetera. We're just feeling our way through this and trying to do it the best way we can for the right reasons. And chances are, it pushes the limit on some FLSA considerations. And again, our Goldilocks size organization allows us perhaps to manage that a little bit easier.
And so one of the things that we've also looked at doing is trying to say, what else can we do? And so I put together some ideas, some things that I'm seeing that other communities are doing, that private sector employees or employers are doing. And this is really just intended to get everyone thinking. And, you know, maybe there's a couple of things on here that are minor that you could reasonably start with. I think the dress code is probably one of the easiest sort of low-hanging fruits to talk about. You know, as Jason had mentioned, it was a hit with the River Falls, And I will tell you that when I implemented that in Clintonville, it was as well. I am a firm, and some people on this Zoom meeting may disagree, but I am a firm believer that what I am wearing does not affect how well I do my job. How I feel in what I am wearing affects how I do my job. And so having that relaxed dress code where it's like, okay, we're adults, be presentable. And that's really the extent of it. I had one employee came to me in Clintonville who asked me, I'd been there about 6 months, and asked me if I was okay with her wearing clothes that showed her tattoos. Now, I know you can't really see on this screen. I have 12 tattoos, and I would wear clothes that showed those tattoos. And I'm like, of course, absolutely. And I was just surprised that she would ask, but that was sort of the environment, and that was the sort of standard that had been set prior to me coming on board. And that was a big deal for her. So looking at this list and just kind of figuring out what's going to work for you guys, what bits can you take? Student loan repayment. I mean, I know it's a cost factor to that, but I think that that's a big thing, especially as there's a decent amount of the work that we do that does require degrees, or at least we prefer that somebody has a degree in it. And then, you know, again, just understanding that we're not saying take every single one of these things on this list and do it. We're saying these are the things that we're seeing, and we need to start understanding that we have to reconsider how we approach HR and how we approach recruitment and retention, and understanding that we have to shift our mindset if we want to continue, or if we want to obtain, you know, the employer of choice sort of title.
Yeah, and I would just add real quick, I'm sorry, Sharon, in the interest, I probably have some questions. None of this is being done without thinking of service delivery as well. So I think it's important to point out, perhaps continually, service delivery and the service we owe the public is still paramount and priority. We've just accepted we're not going to be able to do it with either not be able to do it, or not be able to do it as good as it should be done because we don't have the best talent, if we're not doing what we can to recruit and retain that best talent. So again, that's why that's bolded. I mean, just so you all are aware that we're well aware service delivery and public service is still what it's all about. So I guess, Bob, I think we're okay for some time for some questions or conversation, wherever you want to lead.
We've got about 10 minutes left. If you can stop the screen share, and then I can see everybody here.
I think it was good timing, considering that the first time we did this, we had like an hour and 15 minutes, I think, or hour and a half or something like that. So
yeah, this was perfect. Thank you. It was very interesting. So let's just go ahead and open it up for questions. You can just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question of either Jason or Sharon. Well, I've got one while people are trying to overcome their shyness here. So you mentioned your city councils and village boards building that trust and respect between those entities. Is it also about building that trust amongst the residents that you represent? Has there been any pushback from the community that you represent, or not really?
In Clintonville, that was one of the things that I think it had mentioned that had surprised me, that we didn't get that community pushback.
Yes.
In our role as the administrators, one of the in the management position is communicating with the public, of course, and making sure that we explain to the public of what we're doing and why. But I would also encourage those that are on the meetings that are on the elected side, that I think is also really critical for the elected officials as well to be a part of those communication efforts. And when they're approached by the members of the public, that they also help communicate the why behind the decisions that are being made. I think your administrator will appreciate it, for one, but also I think hearing that from the elected officials helps reinforce the culture that you're trying to to create and provide for your employees.
Yeah, and I would add for us, Bob, to be honest with you, I think that's something that surprised me, that we haven't gotten more, I guess, skepticism or feedback from the community, or even elected officials, to be honest with you. And we really don't. And I think it's where our geography probably helps us. What we find is the employers in Minnesota probably are more ahead of at least Western Wisconsin employers when it comes to a lot of this stuff. So considering a lot of our community heads across the river to go to work, a lot of what we're doing, they've had in their workplace for some time. So I think that our geography is actually probably helping us there. And for example, so our local news channels come out of the Twin Cities. And so the big news lately has been, and I think it's actually going to happen, Minnesota is pushing for statewide parental leave requirements for employers over a certain number of employees, and the governor's pushing for 12 weeks of required paid parental leave for employers. I can't remember how, for employees over what size, and they have a budget surplus that they're hoping to use to fund this, and they do have the DFL, which is their state Democratic Party, the Democrat Farmer Laborer Party, controls essentially all the sides of the Capitol there in Minnesota now. So I think it's probably going to happen. Point being, that's running on the news nonstop. So, I think that's what our community is kind of seeing. That's just a good example of where our geography has probably suited our community to be more well received of stuff like this.
Okay. Any questions from the group here? Just go ahead and unmute yourself if you do have questions. I guess, Haley, go ahead.
Yeah, hey Jason, great presentation for you and Sharon. Thank you so much for doing this. Out of all the things that you have brought before your superiors, for consideration or approval, is there anything they said no, absolutely not to?
Oh, what a great question. So paid parental leave at first, and that's one where the HR director and I thought, the old saying, choose your battles wisely. That's one where we thought it was a battle worth choosing. So we spent some time doing some research and putting together the proposal, and we ended up getting there. I'll tell you, we tried to get 6 weeks, we got 4 weeks. So, so maybe that's a good example. I was trying, I do have one. Understand, this is one of the few I was not supportive of. Our HR director wants to do bring a dog to work day like every day, which I hate the idea. I shouldn't be too negative, but that's one. The city administrator, thankfully, has said no from the beginning. So maybe that's a good example.
I see some potential liability there if somebody got bit or something like that. So
yeah, absolutely. That was a big scare of mine.
For us, I was surprised at, it wasn't a no, but when I went to the council in Clintonville about the about the emergency closure pay, I was surprised that there was some, at least individually speaking during the discussion, some real pushback on that idea. And yet the paid parental leave, not only did they not question it, but when I went to the personnel committee with that proposal as part of the overhaul, not only did they support it, they doubled what I was asking for, because I went in thinking, I don't know that this is even gonna happen. So it's really surprising to see what some push back on versus what others do. But I have not, and again, I'm in the very beginning stages of that, even here in Shorewood Hills. But I have not yet had them just flat out turn something down. I mean, some things have been more discussions and more work, but I have luckily not had, I have not been told no.
And Haley, I've had opportunity to think now while Sharon was answering that. And so I do have a good example, and I share it because you guys are gonna think I'm crazy, and I like that. I like seeing the reaction. But I'm gonna use a term that I know, and probably some of you, at least in the Dane County area, are probably affiliated with the university system, are familiar with. One of the things we've talked heavily about here recently, sabbaticals for public employees. What we're finding is the grind on public employees, the hyper partisanship that's trying to infiltrate the local level, the perhaps sometimes the community members that have sometimes lost their filter nowadays and feel emboldened or empowered to say that, whatever horrible things they want to say. It's wear and tear on employees. And so our city administrator and I, and HR, we've been talking about some sort of sabbatical concept. I don't know what that may look like. We've been talking about maybe every 5 years you get your Be Well account. You can use it for that sort of reason. We've been talking about, that was not, the mayor was like, I'm not there on that. Like, no. And so that's one it's on a wish list for one day revisiting. So yeah, sometimes it might be a wish, but that we think is born with some rationality, which might even be pushing, the envelope or the leading edge. But yeah, no happens, and that's okay.
And also too, what's been really that I've appreciated, and where I've had, I've had the senior elected individual tell me, this isn't something that I would do. This isn't something I really like, but it's your decision and I trust you. And so I think that, has been really helpful as well, as to, it's not a matter that I've had people just rubber stamp the things that I recommend or that I think we should be doing. I've been challenged on them, but there's been the support to say, okay, we'll see what happens, sort of attitude. And that's, I think, a really good way to look at things as well, is you may say, hey, have you thought about this? Or this may be a challenge. And those are things you really should be talking about. But at the end of the day, being willing to try something and see if it works for your community.
I think you've both mentioned trust in your presentation. Have you had any problems with giving that much flexibility to employees and the trust maybe wasn't there, or haven't you really encountered that?
No, I think Jason and I both have dealt with violations of that level of trust that we've provided in staff. And that's, I think, when earlier in this presentation, I had made the comment that if you can't trust your staff, it's a very different conversation that you should be having. It's not necessarily about, perhaps what your policies are, or what you do or don't allow, what kind of flexibility you provide. It doesn't mean that you need to take that away just because there is, that misuse. It just may mean that you may not have the right staff in the right positions, and you may still need to work on the culture and the making sure that you're communicating what those expectations are to the staff as well. So there have been those instances where, for lack of a better phrasing, that trust has been violated, but you address those, and I've addressed those individually, as opposed to just saying, okay, this isn't going to work, we're going to take this away.
Yeah, and I think certainly I'll be the first to admit, I came into this organization 5 years ago from working for a city of 500,000 people with a workforce of 7,500 people. And so I came in with used to much more bureaucracy and policy and greater, the bigger you get, perhaps there's more opportunity for people to take advantage of stuff. So I came in much more skeptical, and my public safety background probably made me a lot more skeptical of just the employee nature in general. And I've acquiesced. I'll put that on Scott Simpson, my administrator, since he's not here. And if you see him at a conference, you can put it on him. He's the one that's perhaps convinced me otherwise, and has really been on me from day one about, we're a trusting culture. We trust people to do the right thing. They will do the right thing. And again, he's right. I don't know if it's something in our water, if it's something magic. I actually think if most organizations gave their people the ability, I really have come around to acquiescing that it would work by and large.
Okay.
I see Todd had a question.
Right.
What has replaced your performance evaluation? So Todd, this is like literally as 11 a.m. today. So some of it we're going to be working on, but so what we're doing is we provide, I guess, guidelines for supervisor stay interviews. And so we provide a set of questions that they should be in. Well, I should back up. We establish the expectation that supervisors have to be having these at a minimum of a quarter. Most we're finding are doing it monthly. And then we provide a guideline, and HR then trains supervisors to maintain their own files on each employee, a working note file. So, and we encourage them to put notes in their files. We also tell the supervisors, just because we're going to stop doing this big, what often was an anxiety-laden formalized annual review process, which by and large, most people just got good reviews. Just because we're shifting away from that doesn't mean that department heads, if they have individualized needs, can't still do, you know, a more formalized approach if they feel necessary. But it's more of a template for questions and that conversation.
Okay. Well, we're just after 1 o'clock. Haley, one last question, and then I think we'll wrap it up.
So, you know, growing up in Madison, Wisconsin, where both my parents worked for the state, I had always been told that working for the state or your local government was the gold standard, you know, and I work for CARPC, the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission, and they used to be based in the city county buildings. So because we are the only single county regional planning commission, we tend to align all our personnel policies and pay structure and things like that with Dane County as our closest competitor. And also we kind of look at the city of Madison because we're right smack dab downtown. I'm trying to say that over the last few years with COVID and everything, we need to look beyond that and think of, you know, the private sector as a bigger competitor now too. Are you feeling that as well?
Absolutely. So a couple things for us. You know, we're going through a class and comp study right now. We do one every so many years. We have a consultant that leads us through that. And we just had conversations last week about who are we going to use as our comparables. And we certainly look at similar sized around our area, but we also look through Wisconsin and pick similar type communities, which some of you are, that have the electric utility is a big comparable necessity for us. And then we try to pick private employers as comparables. And what we find, and our consultant confirmed for us, is it's hard to get the data from them. So as much as we want to say we want to use, for us, that we want to use 3M, you know, to look at, see what they're offering, or SCH, our big engineering firm in the area, whatever it may be, it's hard to get the data, the pay data from them. We can get some benefit data more often as a comparable, or quite honestly, employee spouses work there and we can get it that way, or there's circles people know, but that pay data is really hard to get from the private employers in our experience.
I would also add too, is that, you know, it is important to understand what other people and other employers are doing, and certain things that you really, especially with respect to pay, that you need to try to, you really should try to stay up on as average as much as you can. Some communities, it's a lot harder. Shorewood Hills, we struggle with that. We just went through a referendum this year. It was successful, but it's difficult for certain communities to keep up. We are right outside of Madison. We're right surrounded by a bunch of larger communities that do pay more. But I think I would also encourage you and advise that when you're looking at your structure, you're looking at how you really should be looking at what environment do you want to have? What sort of culture do you want for your community, and not be focused entirely on how you compare it to other communities. Sometimes it's figuring out what works for you and what you want to be. What kind of employer do you want to be for your staff?
I understand what you're saying there. I think it's difficult with us being located in downtown Madison with the city and county right there, because they are the most apparent. And, you know, we have a university down the street. So Madison's always been one of those anomalies where you have, you know, PhD candidates driving taxi cabs because they want to stay in Madison, and, you know, that doesn't fly everywhere else, but it's a rather insulated environment here.
Right. Well, Sharon and Jason, thank you so much for being here today. We certainly do appreciate it. This was very interesting and informative. So, Forbes, did you have any
Thank
last
you.
thoughts?
Thank you.
Nope, I was just giving the hand clap
Okay,
reaction.
very good. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Yep. Thank you, guys.